My name's Rhett Maxey.
We are Travis and Brandy Rice.
My name is Alex Lopez.
My name's Chris Haggard.
And I'm ready.
And we're ready.
I'm ready.
And I'm ready.
My name is Alex Lopez, and I'm ready to testify. I grew up in Southern California, beautiful weather, beautiful beaches, and with my mom and my dad until my parents divorced when I was younger. So my Jesus life growing up was, I didn't really know him. We made it a habit to go to church on Sundays, but it was anything that really stuck. We kind of just went with the flow of it on Sundays. I had a couple of friends growing up who would go to church camp, and a real good friend of mine growing up, Mark Lohman, I remember getting these church letters from youth group, and he would write and say, "Hey, Alex, we're having a blast at youth group. Let me tell you about Jesus." And I remember asking him a couple questions, but I think it was more because I wanted to know, well, what else did you do at camp? It wasn't really anything serious where I was actually bought into the idea of knowing Jesus. Soccer was something that was really important to me growing up. I enjoyed the game, super competitive person that still hasn't left me. And I grew up playing soccer since I was younger, all the way up until high school, and even had the opportunity to play in college. And that's kind of how I landed out here in Hobbs. So I had already started college back home at Cal State Fullerton, and I was going into my second year already. In October of 2007, I got a phone call from the coach at the University of the Southwest here in Hobbs, and they called asking if I would be interested in coming out the following year to play soccer. At that time, I had my own plans. I knew what I wanted to do, and I wasn't too set on leaving California. A couple months later, in December, I got another phone call from the same coach, super persistent about me coming out. Again, I said, no, I'm okay, I'm good, these are my plans, and I'm all right with it. Finally, about a month later, they decided to send some information. It was the third phone call. I asked my mom about it. My mom was kind of like, it's just soccer, I don't think you really need to go. And I had asked my dad, and my dad said, well, why not? Give it a shot. And so I remember I called up a few buddies. I signed my letter of intent. We went out for pizza that night, and that following fall of 2008, I was moving to Hobbs, New Mexico. So we drove from California to Hobbs, New Mexico. My dad drove his truck. My sister tagged along with me in my car, and my dad had an old road map, and that's how we got here to Hobbs, New Mexico. My dad just really enjoyed using maps. He was old school kind of guy, and we ended up passing the university 3 times, and we were headed back to Lovington, and we saw the sign on the right hand side that said University of the Southwest. We pulled in to the one-way loop, and I looked over at my sister and I said, what did I get myself into? It was major culture shock coming from big state in California to small town USA in Hobbs, New Mexico, and I had no idea what I got myself into. And I was ready to turn around. I remember stopping and pulling up, and my dad said, you've got to give it 1 year. You signed up, you got to just do it. And so I did it, and I loved it. And 18 years later, still here. So my years in college were your typical years. I didn't really have a lot of structure besides what I knew with soccer. And so I did what normal college kids did, and was just really involved in the worldly things. It wasn't until my last year of college where I actually ran into a few people, made some new friends who were kind of like the Jesus freaks on campus. They had something was different about them, and I wondered what that was. So I was invited to church by one of them, and I attended Hobbs First Assembly, and there I I would say a small window of my life was Jesus. I've started really figuring out that foundational part of what it meant to follow Jesus, but it didn't last long. After I graduated college, I kind of just went back to the things that didn't matter, but I wouldn't know that it would be a full circle at some point. A couple years after I graduated college, I jumped into the public school system, and I started my teaching career with elementary, teaching 5th grade for a couple years until I moved over to the high school and I became a head coach for the girls soccer program. During that time, I wasn't a bad person. I was just, living in the world. It wouldn't be until September, the summer of 2019, where I met a friend who would eventually become my best friend, Maria. And we were having some really good conversations and deep conversations. And I remember going through something and she said, well, why don't you come to church one day? Just join me at church. And I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. Where do you go to church? She said, Cowboy Junction. I said, that's kind of really out there. And so we had made plans to come Sunday to church. And there was an 11 o'clock service at the smaller building. And so I got ready and I showed up early and I waited for her to text me to tell me that she was here. And she texted me and said, hey, I'm not going to make it today. And I kind of thought, oh man, I can turn around right now or I can walk in through the doors. And I eventually walked in through those doors. And I'll never forget that feeling of just belonging. And so Cowboy Junction became my home church. I rededicated my life to Jesus. That series that I started at Cowboy Junction was the Breakthrough series, and that really spoke to me and pulled at my heartstrings. I rededicated my life to Jesus, and I caught on fire. I was accidentally invited to youth by Jeff Kuchar. He accidentally sent a text message to me, which would have been the wrong Alex, and he meant to text another Alex. And I remember he texted something along the lines of, hey, can't wait to see you tonight at youth. And I thought, I don't really know what that is, but okay. So I showed up, and I'll never forget their faces when I walked in through the door. CG would try to play it off, couldn't really play it off. I knew something wasn't all right until it was probably a month later when Jeff said, hey, I accidentally texted you. But I got deep into the involvement in serving the youth. And it was awesome because it allowed me to serve the youth in a different capacity outside of teaching and coaching. Serving youth basically helped me really grow my roots in my faith, and it gave me a lot of accountability and a different perspective of serving kids in a different capacity outside of a teacher and a coach. And I really enjoyed that part. So after serving in youth, I was invited and asked to help at Camp Crossfire that summer of 2021. And so we had it here at the church, and that was just my first time being involved in that kind of sense. And it was like all of the things that Mark had written in those letters when I was younger were coming to life. And it was just a really neat perspective at that time. And so we wrapped up camp, and as tired as we were, I remember CG sending a text message about, hey, we're doing baptisms for the kids after camp. And I felt it again, that heart, that pull on my heart. And I remember texting CG and saying, hey, is it okay if leaders get baptized too? And without any hesitation, CG was like, absolutely, yes, of course. So I called my friends, Edos and Maria, and I said, hey, I think I'm getting baptized tonight. And so on August 21st, 2021, I was baptized outside of what's now the youth center in a horse trough at sunset. And so that was another big pivotal moment in my life. I remember talking about there are no accidents with God. He puts you exactly where you're supposed to be. And that was a true testament to how I was feeling and what I knew and had learned. And so I knew that I had a God-sized hole in my heart, and I was not a bad person. I was just empty and lost. But I had finally found the one that made me whole, and that was Jesus. So now we're fast tracking. things are moving. I'm seeing changes in not just myself, but in the way that I do things. My career's taking off. My faith changed the way that I interacted with my students. It changed the way that I coached, and now it changed and has taught me the way to lead right now in my current capacity. So I started going to CrossFit and hanging out with you in the mornings, and that was just another really cool opportunity to have conversations that may just be small, short, but always impactful. I got involved heavily. We got started on echo groups. We did Bible studies, attended the Create conference, and I have some amazing mentors here at church, amazing friends, and built some great relationships with Mondo and still continue to have those relationships. And just really getting heavy here in the church, serving, whether it's the media team or prayer team. But I've made my faith the center of everything that I do. And that took off. And when that took off, I noticed a big shift in my life. And I didn't realize that this whole time, my dad was watching me. So at this time, my dad is still living back home in California. My parents are separated. In 2017, my dad gave me a call and said, "Hey, I think I want to come out and visit." I said, "Sure, come on down." And so what I thought would be maybe a 2-week visit turned into my dad staying. And that was pretty special. So my dad and I started building up our relationship back when I was in college. And so when I was younger, my parents were separated, and I didn't see much of my dad when I was younger, kind of in and out of the picture. And my mom did the best that she could, right, with what she had. It wouldn't be until my later years where my dad and I would get back on track and really develop a relationship again. So my dad really didn't know Jesus. He was grew up in the church a little bit, but nothing as far as like an actual experience with Jesus. And so my dad really dismissed the idea of Jesus and God in whole. My dad was a very matter-of-fact kind of guy. And so prove it, let me see it before I believe it. I started going to church and getting heavily involved. I'd come back and, "Hey Dad, this is today this series that we were going through. The Love series, for instance, was a big series that really stuck with me. And that was something I shared, and we would have these conversations, and my dad would kind of question and sit back and, okay, that's interesting, but that would be it kind of thing. So June of 2024, about the middle of June, my dad wasn't feeling well. He had a lot of indigestion. He just thought he had overate on a big meal, and so we didn't think much of it. I had gone to California to visit some family that last weekend of June, and when I got back, my dad still wasn't feeling well. It wouldn't be until that Tuesday, July 2nd, where some of his coworkers actually forced him to go and get checked into the clinic in town. And so he went in against his own will, but that would be a pivotal moment for us. That day we had to go get some blood work done. So I took my dad to go get some blood work that same day. And that night, about 8 o'clock at night, my dad's phone rang, and it was the doctor. And all I could hear was my dad say, "What? Oh, wait, hold on." And so my dad passed me the phone and said, "I don't know what she wants." And the doctor said, "Whatever you're doing right now, stop and go to the nearest emergency room." And so I looked at my dad, and my dad looked at me, and he said, "Okay." And so we went. I took my dad to the hospital here in town. And my dad had an EKG ordered. And they, put all those things on and got him going. And what ended up happening, asking him a bunch of questions, and he said he felt fine, he felt good, everything was good, until the doctor's face, something wasn't right. And so after asking what was going on, they said, "We can't tell you exactly, but we know that your dad has had a massive heart injury. We don't know what, but he's had a massive heart injury." And so they left the room, and my dad was laying on the floor, and I don't know if it was the chaos and the craziness of that time, But all of a sudden, my dad kind of looked over at me and just said, I can't do this. I'm so sorry. I can't do this. I said, hey, you're okay. You're all right. Stop talking crazy. And he again said, I can't do this. And I said, hey, we're going to be okay. And the next thing that I heard out of my dad's mouth would be something I never thought I would hear. He said, I need you to pray with me. And so I got up and I walked over and I grabbed his hand and I started praying with him. And I don't know all that I said. I know I wasn't asking God to save him or heal him, but I do remember asking my dad, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And my dad said, yes. And then I said, do you take him as your Lord and Savior? And my dad said, yes. And I finished praying and we said amen. And within minutes, my dad's color came back. My dad was able to sit up and catch his breath. That night, July 2nd, I know my dad was saved, not physically, but spiritually. So the next morning, my dad was taken to UMC, where I joined him that morning. And as we waited for him to get into a room, we had some really great conversations about what happened that night before. My dad finally was able to get situated into ICU, where he had a room. And we started the mornings with prayers and ended the days with prayer. And that was a big thing for my dad. I saw something completely change in him. And we would have conversations about Jesus and the miracle that he did. And I know that my dad fully believed that God had saved him. And so I brought, the next day I brought a children's Bible and my dad would read stories out of it. A couple other days we would just sit and have really good conversations. And it wouldn't be until that Saturday where I told my dad, hey, let me tell you what's happening at church. And my dad said, well, what are you guys doing? I said, we're doing this thing called the Testify series. And they're picking a couple people from church to share their testimony. And my dad was sitting at the edge of his bed. And my dad looked at me and he said, well, one day I will be able to get in front of your church and share my testimony. And I said, absolutely, Dad. We'll do it. And that next day, we watched church online. And my dad watched the Testify series of John and Margaret Wolf and was moved by the worship set. And at the end of that, you and Heather came on stage and said what you guys say all the time. If it's not good, God's not done. And my dad loved that. He picked that up real quick. And so that became something we went back and forth with. If it's not good, God's not done. I would say the first part, my dad would finish it off. And we would spend the next few days just saying that, even before he would go into surgery. If it's not good, God's not done. And my dad believed that 100%. I shared with my dad one night the story of the prodigal son. And essentially came down to the idea of, Dad, see, it doesn't matter how long you've been away. God's ready to welcome you with open arms. That's how much he loves you. That's how much he loves us. He doesn't turn us away or away from us. He just wants us to come back. And my dad loved that story of the prodigal son. I think because it resonated so much with him and what he was feeling and his story. And so that was something that he really held on to, was the parable of the lost son. And that was something that was really special for him because he felt like that was him. So my dad would end up having to have a triple bypass, in which he went in and came out great after. But a couple days after that, on July 11th, he would pass away. Knowing what I know about God's love, it wasn't perfect, but I felt peace with what had happened because I knew where my dad was. So now it's time to start getting some arrangements put in place. And I knew that I wanted to honor my dad in the way that he should be. And church in itself was something that was new for him. And so there was the idea of, instead of having his service here in the sanctuary, that we would have his service out in the lobby in front of the Jesus board. And because my dad had accepted Jesus, my friend Maria said, hey, why don't you see if they'll let you turn on a light bulb for your dad? And so I brought that idea across, and you said, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And so we had my dad's service out in the lobby of Cowboy Junction in front of that Jesus board. And I spoke at my dad's service, detailing and sharing his testimony about what transpired over those 9 days while my dad was in the hospital, and sharing the good news of what had happened. And I had the opportunity to turn on a light bulb to honor my dad and his decision that he made on July 2nd. We watched church online on Sunday, and my dad was moved by the worship set that included the song Waymaker, and we heard the amazing testimony of John and Margaret Wolf. My dad summed it up by saying, even in tragedy, there can be good. Wow. Then Pastor Ty closed it by saying, if it's not good, God's not done. And my dad liked that saying so much, so we wrote it on his patient board where he saw it every day. We got into a rhythm of saying it. I'd say the first part, and he would finish. He wasn't saying it to say it. He was saying it because he believed it. He believed God had a plan for him, even at the ripe age of 65. He believed it. And people might think that his story ended on the morning of July 11th, but here we are, hearing and bearing witness to something that can't be explained, but only described as simply a God thing. My dad made a decision of a lifetime on July 2nd, and even though it may feel unfair or short-lived, I believe he is healed, no longer in pain, and living an eternal life in heaven, playing some of the best golf he's ever played. His legacy will live on because of this, and this is something to celebrate. I don't think we truly understand how short life really is. And I think we get caught up in the idea of kingdom work is so big. We're not on a platform every Sunday. We're not going to Bible college. We're not seminary. And I think sometimes we forget that there are no small tasks in the kingdom. So somebody coming from California to small town Hobbs, USA, that's the beauty of it. God knew what he was doing even when I didn't know him. And in this whole idea of my life, God was still leading me to him. There are no small tasks. God has you in your mission field where you need to be for such a time as this. And I fully believe that. You may be the only Jesus someone sees. And that is a beautiful thing. It's whether it's your family, your friends, your workplace. I don't think people really understand how much of an impact you can have in being the only Jesus. I'm not perfect. I don't get it right all the time. I need grace myself. But I know that during this whole time, my dad was watching me. And because of that, he was able to accept Jesus right before he passed away. You gotta love what God has done for you. Whether you're sitting right now and you don't think that you have a relationship with God, God's been watching out for you this whole entire time, just like the prodigal son. I can look back at my life and I see the evidence that God was there in ways that I would have never imagined. And because of that, I'm able to value my faith and share that with those that I love. I'm able to step out and come out of my comfort zone and really believe in the things of Jesus, and at the same time have my faith stretched. And it can be scary. It can be awkward. I mean, in my situation, I was the kid telling their parents about Jesus, when in most times it's the other way around, or it should be. But I know that for that moment, God didn't call anybody else but me for that moment. And that's why we're here. If I can leave you with one thing, it's this. Take a look. I've seen God work through my whole entire life, even at the times when I didn't know him. But when I did, something changed and the light came on. So I would encourage you to take a look, listen, and believe, trust that God's got you.